I'm curious, what is it about you and your personality or your background that made you even want to go so far to understand that phenomenon? Because a lot of us are interested in a lot of things, but very few people would go undercover and live in a certain part of Luton and essentially infiltrate a group to learn why they're thinking in such a way, particularly if you're in strong disagreement with them. What was it that prompted you to do that?
Yeah, so the thing is, I was very young and I was coming out of the tech industry, and I wanted to be a writer and I wanted to explore human psychology. Initially, what I did is I wrote some pieces about psychology and I submitted them to the usual outlets, um, the New York Times, and I was quite naive. And obviously, I was rejected because nobody wants to read, the psychological musings of some, tech worker in his early 20s. And so I realized I wasn't going to get into this industry through the usual avenues. I wasn't going to be able to go through the mainstream, if I wanted to write about psychology. I didn't have a PhD in psychology. I didn't have any experience in the field of psychology, so nobody was going to take me seriously. So, in order to be taken seriously, I realized I was going to have to do something drastic. I was going to have to do something that nobody else would dare to do. And so I decided to just take a crazy leap. I had a few friends around in Luton area at the time, and it was nearby London. And I thought, that'd be pretty cool just to live there. And I can do a bit of research in London. I can also, in Luton as well. And so at the time I was single, I didn't have any sort of nothing tying me down to any particular place. And so I decided just to go down there and just live in the heart of where all this conflict was taking place and just analyze it, and try and work out what was going on. Originally, I was going to write a book about it. But what happened was that after I'd written quite a bit about it already, most of the people that I was studying were either killed or arrested. There was a big crackdown in 2016 because a lot of the people that I was around in Luton, they went to join ISIS between 2013 and 2016. And then there was a massive crackdown in 2015, in which like just all the leaders of Al Mahajroon got basically arrested because they'd been encouraging people to go to fight for ISIS in Syria. So after that happened, and I lost most of my research material because they were all in prison or dead. And so I decided to shift away from that towards other forms of extremism. But I kept all the lessons that I learned during those few years in Luton. I learned so much about extremism firsthand.
Tell me about some of those lessons.
Yeah. So as I said before, so one of the things that was being blamed on extremism was either it was the algorithms or it was people were alienated. There was a lot of talk about people being racist to Muslims and that the racism was causing Muslims to become extreme. Or, there was like some kind of poverty or some other trauma. Trauma was a big one. People were talking about some unresolved trauma that these people had. And I kind of just thought, that doesn't really seem right to me
I,
because,
I can already
yeah,
picture the people.
yeah,
I can already picture the type of people doing these analyses because
yeah,
it's
yeah.
just off the bat obviously wrong.
Yeah, yeah, and even the moment I heard it, I thought this just doesn't seem true to me because there's a lot of people who are traumatized and they don't all become extremists. In fact, most of them don't. And so I want to know what the real reason was. And one of the interesting things that I found about the extremists in Luton was that they were not poor people. They were not they're not even working class. They were middle class. They were well to do. They were well educated. They had been given pretty much everything that anybody could be expected to have in the UK. They were not immigrants either. They were second generation. And they had a lot of them sort of were highly intelligent. They worked as medical students, or they were working in architecture or engineering. So these were highly educated people. They had no problems with money. They had completely comfortable lives, right? So there was no trauma. There was no poor education. There was no poverty involved. These were normal people. In fact, they were above average in wealth. They were above average in education. And so I realized that all of the traditional explanations that were particularly being given by the left were wrong about Islamic extremism. And I actually realized that a lot of it really just stemmed to boredom. A lot of these guys were bored and they wanted to belong to something. They wanted to go out there and do something crazy because it excited them and it filled them with this sense of adventure, and it also gave them a sense of belonging to something greater than what they'd been perhaps given. So while they were not alienated from society, they did seek more belonging to something, some grand project that they could be part of. And so this was a big insight for me, because what I realized was that you could give people the best education. You could give them everything that they want. You could give them a good house. You could give them, nice job. You could give them all the things that people expect to get from society. And some people will still rebel against all of that. And they will still just try to kill people, try to blow things up, as that famous line from, I think it's from The Dark Knight. Some people just want to watch the world burn, no matter what, And this was a big eye opener for me, because I realized that the problems they're not environmental problems. These are problems that come from personality, which is something that is very controversial for a lot of people, because there's this idea, a very popular idea in the social sciences, which is that people only do bad things because bad things happen to them. Again, going back to trauma, there's always, because the social sciences lean left politically, there's a focus on the environment as a cause for why people do what they do. And this is because it fits with the left-wing worldview. If problems are as a result of environmental factors, then the left can fix these problems by giving people better environments, and everybody will be equal. The only differences between people are environmental. So all you have to do is fix the environment, and then everybody will be perfectly equal, and you'll have the magical diversity, equity, and inclusion. So it fits in with the sort of standard leftist model, and that's why there's a lot of pushback to this idea that it's actually got a lot to do with personality. Personality is a big reason why people become extreme, and this is also shown in crime figures as well. When you look at crime, you see that it's actually a small number of people, a very small number of people, who commit the vast majority of crime. So we say that crime is Pareto. It's Pareto distributed, which means roughly, around 20% of criminals commit 80% of crime. So if this was environmental, this wouldn't make any sense, because it's not as if only a tiny proportion of people are in a bad environment. If you look at things like poverty, if you look at things like people being abused as children, these are actually surprisingly common things. These are not rare events. These are actually quite common. Trauma is very common. Everybody is traumatized in their childhood in some way or another. They're bullied at school, or they have some sort of illness or some of the problem in their life. So pretty much everybody encounters trauma of some kind in their life. So if the idea that people commit crime or terrorism because they're traumatized was true, we would expect a lot more of an even distribution of crime and terrorism. We would see a lot more of it, but we don't. We see it's actually very rare. And this tells us that it's actually a very specific and very unique set of circumstances that lead people to commit crime or terrorism or whatever. And so this is an inconvenient truth that a lot of people in the social sciences don't really want to grapple with. But again, this was, something that I realized was a real problem, because if the social sciences are not willing to understand the true causes of why people become criminals or terrorists or whatever, they're not going to fix the problem. And this is something that seems to not really concern a lot of people in the social sciences. They're more interested in this project that they have of trying to promote their political causes, their activism. So this was what brought me onto another form of extremism, which is wokeism, which I rebelled against, and I found quite interesting to study, because what I realized is I got a lot of pushback from a lot of crime and terrorism researchers when they read my work, because I published some work with the Quilliam Foundation, which was advising the government on Islamic extremism, and that sort of got my work into the sort of lap of a lot of terrorism researchers, academics, and I got a bit of pushback from them, in which they were saying that I was simplifying the issue, and that environment does play a part and all this sort of stuff. And I haven't denied that environment plays no part. I'm not saying that environment plays no part. Of course it plays some part, but it's not the main reason why people become extreme or why they commit crime. And I realized with the pushback that I got that a lot of things about my work was being sort of discounted because it didn't fit the right politics. And again, it's crazy because if you look at what ISIS themselves have said, ISIS had a magazine which they used to publish monthly, which was called Dabiq. And in this magazine, they actually explained their reasons for why they hate the West, why they're fighting the West. And it's got nothing to do with foreign policy. They say themselves, it's not because of foreign policy. It's not because of, neo-colonialism or whatever. It's none of that stuff, right? Like the reason that they hate the West is simply because the West are not Muslim. That's it, right? They don't have any deeper reason for it. Like in their worldview, people are either good people or they're infidels. There's no in between. Either they're good Muslims or they're infidels. There's no such thing as somebody who's, a bad Muslim. If you're a bad Muslim, you're not a Muslim. And if you're not a Muslim, then you don't have rights under their ideology. And again, if you look at the people that went to join ISIS, these are not alienated people. These are not people who come from the bottom rungs of society. A lot of these people were quite rich. A lot of them were engineers, doctors, or medical students. So this is not these are not people that were rejected from society. These are people who were given the best education, living standards that they could have hoped for, and they still rebelled. And so it was literally just trying to sort of get people to understand this. And the pushback that I got from a lot of academics was that I was being Islamophobic, racist. Even I've got people calling me racist, even though I'm the same ethnicity as the people that I'm writing about. They still call me racist, And so I kind of realized that there's another form of extremism. I realized that there's another form of extremism which was not as overtly violent as the Islamic extremism, but which is probably more dangerous because it's got a lot of power, a lot of institutional power, a lot of cultural power. And so I sort of started writing about wokeism, because of the kind of reactions I was getting. And so, yeah, that led me into a whole new can of worms.
This episode is brought to you by Sambrosa, the best way to get your 8 hours of rest. If, like me, you sometimes struggle with nighttime restlessness and allergies, then Sambrosa Night Syrup could be a game changer for you. Sambrosa contains a natural base of 7 organic herbs, honey, and a small amount of antihistamine. It's effective and soothing with no harsh chemicals, no high fructose corn syrup, and no artificial flavors or dyes. I've been using Sambrosa for several months now, and I can personally vouch for its effectiveness when it comes to improving my quality of rest at night. I also love the fact that they're a family-owned company who share my values of faith, freedom, and integrity. My listeners can try Sambrosa today and get 10% off by going to sambrosa.com/Zuby10. That's SAMBROSA.com/Zuby10 for 10% off your order. Try Sambrosa today and wake up ready to embrace life's opportunities. Go to sambrosa.com/Zuby10 and try it out.